Stop everything, because the moment royal insiders have been whispering about in hushed, almost fearful tones has finally exploded into the open, and it's uglier, colder, and far more calculated than anyone expected. A king battling illness, a son pushing limits, and a door once held open by fragile hope now slammed shut with unmistakable finality. This isn't just family drama. This is power. This is control. This is a centuries-old institution quietly drawing a line in the sand and daring anyone to cross it. Picture it, the dim, early morning light filtering through palace windows, papers stacked like accusations, headlines screaming betrayal in ink that refuses to fade. A father, not just any father, but a king, reading about his own son turning every private fracture into a public spectacle. Not once, not twice, but again and again, across continents, across cameras, across narratives that seem too perfectly timed to be accidental. And in that moment, somewhere between exhaustion and realization, something shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Enough is no longer a thought. It becomes a decision. Because what we're looking at here isn't a misunderstanding. It's a pattern. A pattern so obvious that even those closest to the throne could no longer dress it up as complicated family dynamics. For years, there were excuses. Keep the peace. Don't escalate. Leave the door open. But every open door became an invitation, not for reconciliation, but for another headline, another interview, another carefully crafted moment that chipped away at the very structure holding everything together. And suddenly, the question isn't why now? It's why did it take this long? And then comes the breaking point. Not a single event, not a single speech, not even a single betrayal, but a slow, relentless build of moments that, when stacked together, form something impossible to ignore. The whispers grow sharper. The language becomes less diplomatic. Words like strain quietly transform into words like damage. And behind closed doors, something far more serious is being acknowledged. This is no longer manageable. Because here's the part that doesn't get said out loud, but everyone feels it. Every move, every public appearance, every carefully timed statement, it doesn't just happen. It lands. It lands on a man already carrying the weight of a crown, the pressure of expectation, and the very real toll of illness. And stress doesn't knock. It seeps in, it builds, it weakens. And when that stress is coming from inside the family itself, it cuts deeper than any outside criticism ever could. And yet, this is where it turns. This is where it stops being reactive and starts becoming deliberate. The invitation that once symbolized possibility, gone. Not postponed, not reconsidered, withdrawn. And that word, withdrawn, carries more weight than any official statement ever could. Because it doesn't just close a door, it signals that the door was never meant to stay open forever. But why does this matter so much? Because Sandringham isn't just a place, it's symbolism, it's tradition, it's inclusion. And removing someone from that space isn't just logistical, it's deeply, unmistakably personal. It says, without saying it directly, that something has fundamentally changed. That trust, once stretched thin, has finally snapped. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. The narrative being presented publicly doesn't quite match the one being whispered privately. On the surface, there's still talk of love, of family, of hope for reconciliation. But beneath that, a very different story. A story of frustration, of repeated attempts that led nowhere, of boundaries being crossed so many times that boundaries themselves had to be redrawn entirely. Because let's be honest, this isn't just about one invitation. It's about what that invitation represents. Access, visibility, legitimacy. The kind of legitimacy that can't be manufactured no matter how polished the branding or how strategic the timing. And losing that changes everything. And then there's the timing. Always the timing. Moments that should have been about unity suddenly becoming overshadowed. Moments that should have passed quietly turning into global talking points. Coincidence? Maybe once, maybe twice. But repeatedly, it starts to feel less like coincidence and more like a pattern too precise to ignore. Which leads to the question nobody wants to ask out loud: what happens next? Because if the door is closed now, what happens when pressure builds again? When another moment arises? When silence becomes impossible? Does the story de-escalate or does it explode even further? And somewhere in all of this, there's a quieter, more uncomfortable truth emerging. One that doesn't come with headlines or dramatic reveals. Just a slow realization that what we're witnessing might not be a temporary conflict, but a permanent shift. A redefinition of roles, of boundaries, of who stands where when everything settles. Because right now, nothing feels feels settled. Not the relationships, not the narratives, not even the future. Everything is in motion, and every move, every statement, every absence, every decision feels like part of a much larger game that hasn't revealed its final play yet. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Not what's already happened, but what's coming next. And just when you think the silence means things are cooling down, it doesn't. It thickens. It stretches. It becomes that kind of silence that feels deliberate, like something is being held back on purpose, like a storm choosing the exact second it wants to break. Because behind that closed Sandringham door, the consequences aren't sitting still. They're spreading quietly into every corner of this already fragile situation. Now think about this carefully. A door closes publicly, but the real message, that travels privately, through corridors, through advisors, through the kind of conversations that never make it to headlines but shape everything that follows. Because once a line is drawn at that level, it doesn't just affect one invitation, it resets the entire dynamic. It tells everyone watching, from insiders to global audiences, that patience has limits, that even the most carefully maintained restraint eventually gives way to action. And that's where the pressure starts building in a completely different direction. Because when access disappears, when proximity to the crown is cut off, what's left? Visibility has to be created elsewhere. Narratives have to be controlled from the outside instead of shaped from within. And that's dangerous, because when control shifts like that, it becomes unpredictable. It becomes reactive. It becomes louder. You can already feel it forming, the tension between staying silent and striking back. Because silence in this world isn't neutral. Silence is interpreted. It's analyzed. It's questioned. And when someone who thrives on attention suddenly goes quiet, people don't assume peace. They assume something is coming. Something bigger. But here's the part that makes this entire situation feel almost like a slow motion collapse rather than a single explosive event. The foundation underneath it all isn't as solid as it once looked. The image, the influence, the carefully built perception, it's starting to show cracks, not loudly, not all at once, but in small, almost invisible ways that only become obvious when you step back and look at the full picture. Because influence doesn't just disappear overnight, it fades. Deals that once sounded massive suddenly feel less certain. Projects that were announced with confidence begin to stall quietly in the background. Support that once seemed automatic starts becoming conditional, and slowly, almost unnoticeably, momentum starts slipping. And when momentum slips, everything becomes harder. Every move requires more effort. Every appearance needs more justification. Every attempt to stay relevant feels slightly more forced than the last. It's not dramatic, it's subtle, but it's happening. And then there's something even more unsettling beneath all of that. The internal pressure. Because when two people are navigating a situation like this, one that's constantly shifting, constantly escalating, the external tension doesn't just stay outside. It leaks in. It starts affecting decisions, perspectives, priorities. And over time, those differences don't just sit quietly, they grow. Different goals, different strategies, different ideas of what comes next. And when those differences meet the kind of pressure this situation is creating, they don't just stay differences, they become fractures. Small at first, manageable, but under enough weight, they widen. And this is where the entire narrative takes a darker turn. Because what we might be witnessing isn't just a fallout between a family and an institution. It might be something much more personal unfolding underneath it all. Something that doesn't get press releases, something that doesn't get official statements, something that only shows itself in patterns, in choices, in the subtle shift of direction over time. Because ask yourself this, when every external door starts closing, what happens internally? Do people pull closer together, or do they start pulling in different directions? And right now, the signs are complicated. There's still a united front publicly, still the appearance of alignment, but behind that, there are whispers, not loud ones, not confirmed ones, but consistent ones. The kind that suggest things aren't as synchronized as they once appeared. The kind that hint at diverging paths that haven't fully separated yet, but aren't fully aligned either. And all of this is happening while the clock keeps moving forward, because the world doesn't pause for this. The headlines keep cycling, the attention keeps shifting, the audience keeps changing, and what worked before doesn't necessarily work now, which brings us back to the king. Because while all of this is unfolding on one side, something equally intense is happening on the other. A man carrying not just personal strain, but institutional responsibility. A schedule that doesn't slow down just because circumstances get difficult. A role that demands visibility, stability, consistency, even when everything behind the scenes is anything but stable. And here's what makes this moment almost surreal. While one side is losing access, losing momentum, possibly losing direction, the other side is doubling down on duty. on presence, on continuity. And that contrast, it's impossible to ignore because optics matter. They always have. And right now, the optics are telling a very clear story. One side stepping back, whether by choice or by force. The other stepping forward, regardless of pressure, regardless of strain. And that's where the long-term impact starts to take shape, because this isn't just about what happens this week or next month. This is about how the entire structure evolves from here. Who remains central? Who moves to the edges? Who adapts and who doesn't? Because history doesn't remember every detail, it remembers outcomes. It remembers turning points. And whether anyone involved is ready to admit it or not, this feels like one of those turning points. The kind that doesn't announce itself clearly, but reveals its importance only when everything that follows starts tracing back to it. And now we're at that edge, that uncomfortable, uncertain edge where multiple futures are still possible, but not all of them can exist at the same time. One path leads to silence, a real reset, a step back from the noise, from the constant need to respond, to react, to stay visible. But that path requires something rare, patience without immediate reward. And so far, there's been very little evidence of that kind of patience. Another path leads to escalation, bigger moments, louder statements, attempts to reclaim attention through impact rather than proximity. But there's a risk there too, because escalation only works if the audience still reacts the same way. And lately, the reactions haven't been as strong. And then there's the third path, the one nobody talks about openly, the one that doesn't involve strategy or media or positioning, the one that's entirely personal. Quiet shifts, internal decisions, changes that don't get announced but eventually become impossible to hide. And that path, that's the most unpredictable of all, because once personal dynamics start shifting, everything else follows. Public narratives, professional choices, long-term direction, it all changes. So now the situation isn't just tense, it's unstable. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in a slow, creeping way that feels almost inevitable. Like something is moving toward a conclusion, but nobody knows exactly which shape that conclusion will take. And the most unsettling part, we're not watching something that's already happened. We're watching something that's still unfolding, still shifting, still deciding itself in real time. The door at Sandringham didn't just close, it triggered everything that comes after it. Every reaction, every counter move, every decision made under pressure. And now all eyes are waiting, not just for what's said next, but for what's done next. Because in a situation like this, actions don't just follow words. They define the entire story. And right now, the story hasn't ended. It hasn't even settled. It's balancing on that thin, uneasy line between control and chaos, between strategy and emotion, between holding together and quietly falling apart. Something is coming, not loudly, not immediately, but inevitably. And when it does, it won't just shift the narrative. It will expose everything that's been building underneath it all along.